doing
All right.
Okay, are we ready?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Diane Sonnenberg, and I make mosaics as my profession. I teach and do commissions and also fine art, and I've been doing that for probably about 15 years. So I've made hundreds, thousands of mosaics and have a little bit of experience, which is what I'm going to share with you today. So I've worked with Amelia and Mary Jane to sort of help them plan this project, and we've had some sessions where we've showed people how it works, and today is just a refresher course to help again to identify some areas and ways that we can make this easier for everybody. So what we've got here is one of our panels with the lettering already done for the most part. It looks pretty good, but I have a couple suggestions. One very easy way to make sure that the edges are nice and clean is to lay the edge line first, like on this O. Oh, it's not glued down. Oh, great. Perfect. You can fix it.
Wait a minute. We just did that, yeah.
Oh, good, good, excellent. That's perfect. So by laying that outer edge first, then you're able to define the shape of the item, and it's going to be a lot clearer. Like if you've seen somebody's house sign that you have to sort of squint at it to see what the numbers are, that's usually because the edges are a little jiggity-jaggedy. It's not clear-cut. So that's like a really important tip to make sure that your letters are going to be seen well, because people will be driving by at 30 or more and may want to just see it at a glance. And if anybody has questions while I'm talking, that's a really useful way for us to engage and learn the process. You've been doing this for a while, so you might have had some questions come up during the meantime or things that you weren't sure about. So by all means, please chime in whenever you have something come up. So we chose to do the background in this very specific way so that it would look like the flow of water. And the way we lay the tiles out is called andamento. It's an Italian word that basically means the flow and direction of the pieces, the shape of the pieces, in a way that makes sense for what you're making. So in my car today I had this piece of art that I made that I thought exemplified that pretty well. The flow of the leaves coming out, the gold, all of the pieces are facing in that same direction. Here in the center it's meant to be a starburst. I call this piece Origin. So the pieces, I laid them all facing outwards. Here I wanted to accentuate the shape of these areas, so I laid the pieces along the lines of those shapes, and I cut them more square-like instead of rectangular, so that they would just fill, basically.
So no room for grout on this?
No, there's no room for grout on this one because I'm using a very specific material. This is traditional handmade Italian smalti, which is the material that's used in cathedrals, the Vatican, ancient mosaics, Byzantine mosaics. It's a material that's been made for hundreds of years, and it's very prized. It's you can see it's a little rougher. I'll pass this around. It's a little sharp on the edges, so be careful.
It looks like it would be heavier.
Right,
Yeah.
it does. But it's handmade glass. I use this tool or a traditional Italian hammer and hardy to cut it, and then it gives you that textured surface, which, as you saw, reflected the light really beautifully. And then the gold is 24 karat gold. It's just the coolest material to work with.
Is that what you have in your necklace as well?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it is.
that's
And they
great.
make colored gold by layering just a thin layer of colored glass over the gold. So I've got blue gold and red gold and orange gold in this one. Yeah, it's fantastic. Obviously my favorite material.
That makes it
Scary to
pretty-
work with because it's expensive.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's fantastic.
So how do you get the up and downs in your pieces? I mean, they're different sizes here.
Yeah, so the pieces come in chunks. And then I use my tools to cut them, and because of the nature of the glass, it cuts with curves and
Oh, okay.
such. It typically doesn't cut real straight. So that allows me to get that texture.
An uneven texture.
Yeah.
It's cool.
So here what we're doing is we started to talk about is the flow of the water. So we identified the main color we wanted, which is the medium turquoise, and then we have light and dark to accentuate that, along with a few iridescent and shiny pieces to add a little bit of sparkle, so people will think it looks like a water flow. And we laid in the lines so you could see how they work, and I'm going to show you how to make this work really easily. This is the middle color, already cut out. That's great, so I'm just going to start working with that. And there are some main lines here that we've outlined in black. So I'm going to start with one of the main lines. That's all glued down, right? Okay, good. And show you how it goes. The thin set, of course, we use it because it's just going outside and we want it to last. Thin set mortar is the strongest adhesive we can use. So it's an absolute necessity that we use it for this because we don't want it to fall apart in 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
We want it to last. So putting the thin set in a little baggie allows us to create a little dispenser, like a frosting dispenser. And one really quick and easy thing I can do is just lay a strip of this. Bring it just to there. Not too much, you don't need too much behind the pieces, just enough to make them stick to this mesh, because then you're going to take the whole mesh piece and glue it onto the bridge. So this outline shows us that we're working with the darker pieces there.
I think this is a 1, the lighter.
Oh, the lighter.
If it
Oh,
has
okay.
a number, if it has a number 1, it's the lighter. Yeah, it's
Oh,
the
great.
lighter.
Well, thank you. So we'll start with the lighter pieces. I want a nice square piece on the edge. And then we're going to just follow that line. Your pieces are going to be mostly square, but we've cut some with a slight angle, and that allows us to move around the curves in a more elegant way without leaving little triangular sized gaps in between. So I'm going to do one more there, and then
1 minute.
come into the...
So, I just
yeah,
want, if we're looking at this, so you can kind of see, when we use this, if it's a little bit unclear with that, you can kind of see, you can kind of just use this as your little cheat sheet. Most of her number you can kind of see, so she's starting with the white here, and then she's moving into the medium.
So here when I get up to the O, I'm going to look around here to find a shorter piece to fill in right there as we get around the O.
Distance do you want to think is ideal between each piece?
I like about a 1/16 to a 32nd of an inch, a
So
little
just a
more than a
small
fingernail's
gap.
width. You don't need very much.
Yeah.
And I think it looks better if you keep it
Closer.
fairly thin, but you do want a separation.
Gotcha.
So these are roughly, I don't know, what, a 1/16 of an inch, maybe a little bit thinner. So coming around the, I want to be careful to choose pieces that are going to fill in that area from here to here. And then there we're going to have to do a funny little triangle. So instead of that, I'm going to cut a special piece.
Diane, is it better putting the
Sorry,
whole
there.
line,
Gee,
is it better putting the whole line of set, what do you
Thin
call it?
set?
Thin set down and then applying the tiles? Or, cause we were just putting on each individual one and then
It's
putting it down, same?
either or, yes, either or. I'm doing
But you have
it
to
this
hurry before it
way
dries?
to show you a quick and easy way.
Okay,
But yeah, it's perfectly acceptable to do it just one by one. And if you're working with 5 or 6 people around one area, that might just be the way to go.
yeah.
How long can you wait before it dries?
Once I've spread it down here, I've got maybe 2 or 3 to 5 minutes tops before it starts to dry on the top. So you see what I did here was I put a little angled piece next to that part of the O, and that makes this shape easier to fill later. And so I'm going to do that again right here, just to make that a little bit easier. And then continue on my merry way. So now let's go ahead and do this second line. So if I was working more slowly, I'd probably do one at a time.
Okay.
But for the purposes of this,
So just a question, you're doing it right in the center of an unfilled area. Would it have been better to start abutting to the one area just above it and moving down?
well, it would have been if I were not following this particular line, but I want this particular line to be smooth. And then within here, I can adjust the size of the pieces to fill that in, because that's just more of that same line.
right.
So that's why I did it that way. Typically though, you would just continue to move.
It just seems to fit.
It's logical.
Better fitting
Yes.
technique. So.
It is.
Okay.
It is, but the reason I'm doing this is because I really want that line to show up the way that we've drawn it.
Okay.
Because
Like with the edges
this
of the letters?
connects to the next one over.
Okay.
So all of them will have that flow
Okay.
between them. So it's important to have those match up. So, for instance, somebody could actually just do that one line
Like switch
on the
seats.
page.
Yeah, and say, this is my line, I'm doing this.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, and then,
We were kinda trying to do that the other day.
yeah.
Wait, what's my line?
Yeah, like, move over.
Okay, I need another
Sit
one
here.
of those.
That's my line.
Yeah.
So here, so most of the time you could just use what you've got, but if you've got a unique little shape, you're gonna want to cut a special piece to fill it. So there, I'm starting from here this time because I wanted to make sure that piece didn't end up being a tiny little shard or something. And then, if I'm smart, I might go back over here, fill in that piece. And here, what I'm going to do is use a half piece, because I want to stagger the lines coming down this way to make sure that they're, it's called bricklaying, so that your eye is going to read the line coming this way as opposed to that way. If you line them all up, you end up with, you know, another line going in the other direction.
Spreadsheet.
So for example, along the L here, they should have kind of staggered here so there wasn't a secondary line.
Right, yeah, you can see these 4 pieces ended up being sort of lined up, and then it
Okay.
breaks up here, and then starts again for those 3 pieces. So
Mhm.
you want to try to break it up every 2 or 3 pieces.
Okay.
Usually just using a half piece, just cut a piece in half, that'll solve the problem. So here we go with our lighter color, and now we're gonna move back into our medium color. So here, now that I've done that, I know that I've got 2 pieces to fit there, and it looks like I'm gonna need to use a skinnier piece. So I'll look for a skinnier one, and that will make that easier to fill in. And I've sort of made my adjustments in the middle of the line rather than getting to the end of the line and finding I need to cut some ridiculously skinny little piece. It just makes
We've
it
been there.
flow. Oh yes. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, we know.
Uh-huh, yeah.
So now to answer your excellent point, I can come back up here. And fill in that area, and that will be all the medium color. And we're going to start with a staggered piece here, and then just look for pieces cut in the size and shape that we need to fill in. And something very interesting is going to happen up here in a minute, so watch it carefully.
You must be really good at jigsaw puzzles.
Yeah, but I
The size and shape.
I've trained myself. In the beginning, I wasn't very good at it, but over the years, my
Your eyes.
brain and eyes work very well together at this point to see, oh, that needs this or that. And it does happen pretty easily with practice.
You're trying to say we won't start off that good?
We won't.
Well, you never know. A lot of people do. I
People are
didn't.
just made to get talented.
There's a fine line between love and humiliation.
So I cut a larger piece there, but then there's a really good trick. And the Italians call it stoppiamento. You're breaking up one line into 2 lines, or connecting 2 lines into one, and it's a way of expanding and contracting the line. So I laid 1 half piece there, and now I'm going to look for another little piece. Put right there. And then
So when you start getting too wide, you should start doing halves as opposed to go along full on one side and try to find small pieces for the other.
right, it just ends up looking better. And this will go on for, make sure you have glue underneath.
Denise, that's your husband, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought. And he's a doctor and you're a nurse. Yeah. See, you have pretty good memory.
You do have a good
Not
memory.
bad.
Yeah. We usually don't tell anyone, but no.
Because then they want to ask you medical questions.
So what I'm doing now is trying to get a half piece there on the end to break up that line. And I'm switching
Oh, I
back
see.
to a full
Switching
piece
back to
because
full
it's
piece
gotten
instead of-
skinnier.
I gotcha.
See, I thought they all had to go in a, instead of, I don't know what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of all of them going like that, I didn't know you could break it up and turn it around. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. Instead of having it all going perpendicular, you can make some vertical or some
Yeah.
vertical and some
Yeah.
perpendicular. Yeah, looks good.
Yeah, and that's really helpful when you've got to fill in those little nooks and crannies.
Mhm.
because that will inevitably trip you up. So quite often when there's a weird little nook and cranny, that's when you pull out the nippers and just cut a piece to fit. But otherwise, along the straightaways, it's pretty easy to just lay a nice bead of thin set. And just lay those squares and rectangles right in a row.
Are those pretty straight edge or are those kind of trapezoidal? I can't see from here.
Most of these are pretty straight edge. 90% of the pieces will be pretty straight. Then, so the shallow curves, you can just use squares or something very similar to a square, which is what you get when you cut them into quarters. And then the sharper curves, things around the letters and the birds and such, those you'll use something that's more of a trapezoidal shape. We call them keystones, or a piece with an angle. Very rarely do you need to use triangles, but every now and then there'll be some little nook or cranny, like here, where a triangle is the right shape. Most often it's not. It tends to pull your eye if it's in the middle of the space. So here we're going to finish this line, and because I'm working from both ends, any little partial pieces will be sort of hidden within the middle of the line rather than stuck over here along the edge. There, that looks like a bit of a longer piece, so I'll just pull one of my longer pieces. And there we go. So these lines are coming down that way. So because this line is set in, you'll know where to end, and you won't end up with a jaggedy space there. It'll be more natural. And I'll just go ahead and do a couple of those so you can see how that comes together. And this is also the middle color.
Without the numbers, how do you tell that it's the middle color right there?
Because the middle color is what happens when there's no designation for anything else.
Like these must have been designated number 2 or something,
Yeah.
right? All the
Yeah,
yards.
so they'll be highlighted either with the dark blue or the turquoise blue.
So all the water is designated either 1, 3, or nothing. So if it's nothing, it's the 2. And you can.
Okay.
It's Mosaic code.
Yeah.
So I think that piece is too big, so I'm going to move that out and look for something skinnier. There we go, that is better. Tweezers, if you have them, are a terrific tool.
Hello.
Okay, now I have a piece here. Can you toss me a few more of those lines? Thank you.
I'm Sarah. Nice to meet you. Thanks for hosting.
Another angled piece. There we go. So maybe I can get away with using the other half of that angled piece right there. And then that leaves a tiny little space, so I'll look for a tiny little piece.
Everybody, this is Sarah.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi Sarah, I'm Diane.
Diane, you
I'm
wanna come
doing a
over
little
here?
demo
Oh, so
here.
you can, I can see it better.
I can see pretty well
Okay.
from here, actually. Thank you.
Sure.
There, so that's how that works. And I'm going to do a quick little recap of nipper techniques. You have a few pairs of nippers that you're working with here. The two round blades are usually made of carbide. They're not particularly sharp, although if you happen to get a finger in between them or back here, it'll pinch. And that hurts, but it generally doesn't cut you. What you want to do for optimal ease using these is place your hands as far back on the handle as comfortable, and that'll give you the most leverage. Then you position your piece. So I want to cut this piece in half. I position it between the two wheels so that it's perpendicular. And then, this is really important, I hold it by the edge. I usually cut my hand underneath as if there was a drop of water going to fall into it. And then just gently touch the piece over here on this side. Not this side, because that's where my fingers might get pinched. You can also go like that if you want to. It's a little clumsier to do that, so this tends to work pretty well. And what this does is keeps the piece positioned where you want it to be, so that when you cut it, it'll cut in the shape you intended. And once I've got that set, then it's a quick, confident squeeze, and I end up with two rectangular pieces. If you do a tentative, I'm not sure about this kind of squeeze, it's more likely to go off wonky or cut in a curved shape or something else. So that quick, confident squeeze, like you know what you're doing, is the right way to do it.
Are you using the grooves in the back to guide where you have those?
They can be used like that, for sure. But they're actually designed for another purpose, to allow the adhesive to have a little more bonding area on the back. But yeah, you can use them if you're cutting this into thirds. That would be a really good way to do it. If you're cutting some other shape, it's best to cut opposite those lines, because it's more likely to go in that direction and not mistakenly fall into the line. So if I'm cutting that in an angle, cutting opposite the lines will yield better results.
So you cut with the grooves down, correct?
Typically so.
Generally, but
That's
not-
just my habit. I don't know that it makes a difference, but in my brain
It does, okay.
it does. So that's the basics of cutting. If you want to nibble a particular shape, say I've got a curve, then what you do is you take a piece that's already cut and hold it very close to the nippers. And you see what I'm doing? I'm sort of cupping my hand around the nippers to stabilize them. And then just nibbling tiny little pieces off it. This is going to create some shards, so I'm cutting over something that I can sweep up later. If you have like a little bowl or a tray or something, that helps a lot, because you don't want to put your hand on those shards and get them under your nails or something. And just a little point regarding safety. I recommend either goggles or glasses when you're cutting glass. It's very unlikely that something's going to come flying up towards your face,
It could.
but you never know.
Yeah.
It could. So I've seen it happen once in
Oh, really?
15 years.
Oh,
so.
wow.
It does happen. It's very rare, but nonetheless.
Then you have to go to the ER.
Then you have to go to the ER, and
Yeah.
everybody feels bad.
I
It sort of
know.
ruins the day.
That's right.
So yeah, we don't want that. That's not good. So glasses are safety glasses. Sometimes in a big group, I'll just set up a cutting station over at one table, where people who want to cut can cut into like one of these bins or something, and just contain the mass.
And
And
if you
then-
don't have glasses, we have them on the patio.
Yeah. So if I'm holding this out there, the natural tendency is for the glass to go flying off in that direction,
Right.
away from my thing. So if you're sitting around a table, it's going to go into your neighbor's lap.
Right.
So that's important, I think. And also the little tiny shards, that contains silica, which is not good to breathe in, so you want to work at table level, not right here in front of your face. The little shards are just going to fall. They're not going to fly around in the air because they're too heavy for that. But, you know, if you're up here next to your face, you can get little bits of glass dust, and that's not good. If you were cutting something particularly brittle, like maybe ceramic tiles, I would probably put on a mask while cutting, or saltillo tiles, something that has a lot of dust. These typically don't, so it's not a big deal, but if there were 15 people all cutting all at the same time, maybe you put on a mask just to keep it from being a problem. Any questions or concerns about that?
Do you think what we've done so far is gonna work?
Oh yeah, oh absolutely, it's fantastic. The other thing to keep in mind is when we grout this, everything comes together. We'll be using sort of a medium gray grout, which serves to sort of blend and pull together, and then the gray is unique in that it just sort of fades into the background once it's cured. So you don't notice it so much, so that'll serve to just pull everything together, and then you'll see these lines, these design lines coming up.
We've finished one panel, it's out there if you want to see it. Also, when you put it onto the column, on the bridge, do you put the grout down and then the mesh goes on and then more grout on top? Is that how you do it?
Almost.
Okay.
That's basically the idea, but we'll be putting down thin set, which looks a lot like the grout.
Oh,
but the
okay.
thin set is the
It'll
adhesive.
go onto the
Yeah, so we
column.
spread it onto the column using a notched trowel, and the notched trowel allows you to get an even thickness all
Okay.
around. And then you smooth that out so that's all flat, because you'll have a ziggy-zaggy look, and then you just spread it flat so you know it's the right thickness. Then this goes on, gets pressed on with a rubber trowel to press, make sure everything's contacting. And then you go home and let it dry overnight.
And then the grout goes.
Then the grout goes in between.
Okay, gotcha.
So the grout is only filler. It looks like the thin set, but it's only filler. It doesn't have any adhesive properties, and its job is to connect and fill and create a solid surface.
And then we'll do a sealer over that.
And the sealer over that will protect it from, I don't know, maybe 80% of the grime and outdoor influences it'll be subjected to. And that sealer, it's a good idea to just redo it every few years or so. I learned from a manufacturer's rep that even the 15 to 20-year sealers that are supposed to be like the best thing ever, they'll get you a few years. Because anything versus the sun, and the wind, and the rain, the elements are going to win out every time. So you just do it frequently, or just let it patina over time. But the sealer will help preserve it.
So do you recommend when we're trying to get the flow that people take a kind of a little bit of a swath and so work on this side, then work on this side?
Yeah.
So kind of is that, okay.
That's a great idea. So you would take ownership of this swath, and Amelia would take ownership of that swath, and then you meet in the middle, or maybe somebody here, somebody there, working towards the center, and that usually works really well because then you can keep track of your lines.
So it looks like when, say for example, you start this piece, it looks like you recommend before you go all the way over and then trying to fit here, that you come here and fill this in and then meet over here in order to get those straight lines, cause these could be straight
Yeah.
pieces, correct?
Yeah, and there's no need to leave these open until, there's no need to leave those separate. You saw what I do, I just filled that area in with the colors, and it'll all flow together. I'm keeping track of the line rather than the
colors.
color.
Good to know, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so these can just be oops,
Glued down.
glued down. Yes, you go.
We recommend gluing them down.
Yeah. And like you did here, filling in that area before you glue it down, it's helpful when you're first learning and starting out, but once you get more confident, you can just spread a line. And I'm going to do a little show and tell here. I'm sorry.
When we're through at the end of the day, we've been putting some pressure on top of it.
Yeah.
I guess that helps, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Would it help at all using, particularly on really straight lines, getting some sort of straight edge to match?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I saw some people doing that the last time I was here. That's a great idea. Just a little ruler or something to bump them all up, make them real nice and straight. I'm gonna do. I'm sorry for whomever started the ones that are glued down.
Should we
But
use
I'm
them
gonna
here
show
too?
you.
Is it good to use the straight edge on these edges?
That's
Does it
probably
matter?
not as important because the grout and the thin set will fill in around the edges. It's nice to keep it as straight as we can, but a little bit of irregularity along the edge of the design at the edge of the thing isn't going to make a big difference.
Okay.
So I'm going to show you how this line will come together.
You don't have to scrape that off that rest.
I'm not gonna. A little bit of not quite flatness is not a big deal. If it was a lot, I would take the time to straighten it up. So my focus here is only on this line coming around and making sure that I've got pieces that are about the same height. So I'm not going to use this thicker piece there because that's going to interfere with the next line. I'm going to look for the thinner ones.
Oh, and Diane, about the vinegar,
Yes.
you have to take off like this here.
On the top.
When do we do that?
You can do that after it's dry.
Okay.
And is it straight vinegar or diluted vinegar?
Straight vinegar, white vinegar. White vinegar is better because the colored vinegar or red wine vinegar, that could stain the grout or something.
Or apple
if you were doing
cider.
it. Apple cider also could stain. So here I was focused on that edge, so we got a nice clean line around the O, and then I'm going to come over here and do this one, which will allow me to make any little adjustments right in the middle where it's not going to be noticeable at all. So this one comes through like that. We're going to need a angle piece right there on the end. And I'll just use it. No. So this one's a little thicker. I'm using some of those thicker pieces. That'll work. And now I can use thick and thin to fill in the middle part. I need a few thicker ones, so I'll leave that one for someone else to come back and fill that in. And you see that gives you that beautiful shape that you want. And using some of those keystone shapes will allow that line to curve effortlessly. Oh, sure. Okay.
have Diane fix it.
That's exactly what I figured you were doing there.
You caught that?
Yeah. I caught that. No problem. I can do that in 30 seconds or less.
Seems about as fast as 3 or 4 people.
I know. What a few years of practice will get you. You've heard the thing about doing anything for 10,000 hours will yield a little bit of expertise.
Diane, why was it that you said you wanted the thinner pieces all on the edge? You didn't want to have like thin and thick on the outside edge. Why was that again?
Oh, it was to keep the line even because
Okay.
this one next to it that was already glued down was thinner.
Okay.
So I just maintained that.
I see. Yeah, I guess it would look more dry.
It could have been
if you did two
thicker.
different
I
heights.
used the thicker ones in here because the one next to it was thicker.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
Thanks.
so that was the only reason. Otherwise, it doesn't matter.
So did you guys just randomly cut these
We
basically?
did, yeah, like the first
Well,
couple of times.
most of them were squares, we just quartered them.
Yeah.
All of these are like
Yeah.
quarters.
Days,
4
hours.
Oh, I know, it takes a while. So, yeah, cutting them in quarters will yield pieces that are pretty much squarish, but not necessarily, and that allows you to ebb and flow with the lines. This is a fairly complicated little project here, and you guys have been really doing a great job. There, so see how that flows. I've got a little oddball piece there, but that was the kind of shape we needed in order to fill in that area. So
Okay.
that's how that works.
Are you gonna show us the
The
birds?
birds.
as well?
Yes,
The birds
yes,
and the
let's do the
leaves.
birds.
Let's do.
So let me take
Working
this
over to that.
and this.
Okay, we'll pause.
And then we talked